It's the Kyle Heimann Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Heimann here with Andrea Serrani, and every morning we get up and we try to figure out what we're going to do for the show. Now, there's some things that are planned ahead, and we have guests scheduled and topics scheduled and games planned, but sometimes there's things that have happened overnight or over the weekend, and we have to look at, is this something that we need to address on the show? Is it something that we need to talk about? Is it something we need to share with? For example, over the weekend, there was a letter released and became a very big news story.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, is this something that we talk about on the show?
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided not to talk about it. And so to explain that, we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
It is worth addressing.
Yeah, it's a huge deal that this was released. No matter how it ends up being interpreted, whether it's 100% true or partially true or not true at all, it's a huge deal that this happened. And there's no getting around that. If you have not heard about this yet, which would surprise me, Kyle hadn't heard about it this morning. It sort of dropped Saturday late evening. It's not prime time for news consumption for most people. A top Vatican diplomat, the former nuncio of the United States. A nuncio is basically like an ambassador who serves as a kind of a go-between for the bishops in a country and the Holy See. Anyway, a former nuncio of the United States released, he called it a testimony, a statement in which he gave details about how allegations against Archbishop McCarrick were handled between about the year 2000 and 2013 when Pope Francis was elected. It's 11 pages, single-spaced. It's very long. It has a lot of details, a lot of names, a lot of information. His story about what happened when allegations were made, who those allegations went to, what was supposed to have been done. But there also is a lot of information that's not there that could be part of the story that we don't know yet. Mm-hmm. And that's something that people are currently trying to work out. Yeah. Members of the media, journalists, people are trying to find out sort of the other pieces of the story, what might prove the story wrong, or what might prove the story right. Part of the story is that Pope Francis knew about the allegations and didn't do anything about it. I mean, that's what makes this such a huge deal. But we don't know if it's true or not yet, right. Which is part of why you and I kind of sat down this morning and said, well, if we talk about this, like, what would we even say besides this story came out and we don't know if it's true or not, because we don't. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. We don't know. And you and I, not being journalists, won't know until the journalists do the investigating or someone comes out with some kind of proof or corroboration or whatever. We won't know. And so there's not really a lot that you and I can sort of provide to our listeners besides information and speculation at this point.
Exactly.
Which is not really helpful.
Right.
Even if you think it's helpful, it's not.
And that gets back to the question, like, what is the point of sharing this information if we don't even know if it's true or not, or if we don't know to what degree it's true? I'm sure there's truth in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could be 100% true.
Yeah, we just don't know.
But it seems like there's a lot of debate about that, right?
Yeah, it's as simple as that.
So this kind of goes back to the beginning of whenever I started here at Redeemer Radio, and we were talking about what the show was going to look like, what was going to stay the same, what was going to change. And I wasn't really interested in hosting a news show for multiple reasons. One, I appreciate the news. And since we've started doing this, I think I've been trying to stay even more in touch just to make sure if there is something important that we do share it. And so every morning I'm scanning a few different newspapers, and I have apps on my phone now that I didn't have before of news channels that are giving me breaking news updates and things like that I can just kind of be on top of some of the things and checking in with social media. Now I'm following different people that I wasn't following before just to make sure there's nothing major that we miss. And I think some news is definitely more important than others. I think there's a lot of things that are not important at all that get a ton of coverage in the news. And sometimes there's very important things that aren't being covered. And my question is, the news that we are consuming is, how does that news help our relationship with God? Because that's my main concern. And I think it can be positive. I think the news can have very important aspects of our faith embedded into it. So things like different political things. you might hate politics and don't want to hear anything about politics, but knowing some things about politics and knowing the good and the bad of different politicians informs how we vote. And voting is important. We've talked about that in the past. And so there can be something very important there. Revealing truth is positive, especially with some of these scandals. We've talked about the importance of truth being out there, getting the truth out there, exposing truth, the good and the bad, that, as Jesus said, the truth will set you free. And he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The truth is important. And so reporting truth and sharing truth is a good thing. I think also news can help us to be aware of what's happening outside of our bubble, whether that be a Catholic bubble, a United States bubble, to know what's happening elsewhere, to know what's happening in other parts of the world, to know what's happening in other faiths, other religions, to help us to know what to pray for, to know about needs that are happening, whether it be natural disasters that are happening outside of our neighborhood, to know about those, to pray for them, also to know how to take action. So if there's a natural disaster that happens in Puerto Rico, to say, okay, how can we respond to this? Is there a way that we can financially contribute to help those that are in immediate need, to be aware of some of these things, to know how that we can act as Christians. To respond.
Right. Lessons that we can learn from things happening in the news. We're going to keep talking about this abuse crisis in some respects. We've already talked about ways that we can respond with our prayers and our actions. We talked with Cindy last week about some of the context of what might be causing abuse and how we understand it. We plan to talk in the future as soon as we can about what to do if you find out about abuse, or if you have been abused, or even just how to process those things. That's part of what we talked about with Jeannie Ewing last week. There are things you can also learn from the news without it just being about the news. And I think, for us, it's sort of like, we're not going to talk about the news just because it's news. We're bringing you the news if it can serve you in some way.
Well, and you bring up Jeannie Ewing. I'm going to be posting that interview later today because it was so good. One of the things that she talked about was the desire to, and almost obsession, to get into the details of the news, and a lot of times the negative news. And again, it's good to know the truth, but what is the positive outcome of that? Sometimes just dwelling on the negative news, and so often that is what is the news. The positive things never get reported. The great holy priests aren't in the news. Nobody's talking about them. All we hear is the negative, and what is that doing to our faith if all we do is consume negative news? But ultimately, I personally think that news is not the most important thing for my faith, and that I want to look at what is the purpose of the show. It's not a news show. There are other shows that are reporting the news and will do it much better than I will ever be able to do that.
The whole rest of the day, I'm sure, most of the day will be spent talking about news on Redeemer Radio.
What I want to focus on is I want to learn about my faith. I want to learn how I can be a better Catholic, how I can be a better Christian, how I can be a better father, a brother, a son, a husband. How can I be a better person to those around me? I want to learn about my faith, and I want to share what I'm learning with you, the listener, kind of just taking you along with me on these, almost like I'm going to class and taking you along with me. And so we've been able to have all kinds of different local people that are involved with different ministries and in different parishes, and learning from our priests, learning from all these faithful Catholics that are local, talking with national speakers and authors and experts on different topics. A fun thing for us to say is, what's a topic that we haven't talked about lately, or what is something that we have some questions about? And then finding, okay, who's the expert in that area? Let's talk to them about that. Don't want to get my opinion on some of these things. Let's find somebody who literally wrote the book on that topic and pick their brain about it and say, what do we need to know about this topic? What can we learn from it? And also to take suggestions that people have had, which we'll get to that in a little bit. And then the other thing is to just have a little bit of fun and have a little bit of joy in your day, and to learn about things through playing a game, for example. I've learned a ton from the games. I mean, a lot of times they're just kind of silly and fun, but our goal is to also to be able to share a little bit about the faith and to learn a little bit ourselves through some of the fun things that we're doing. And so, like I said, there's going to be other people that are talking about the news throughout the day. There's no shortage of places to get news and facts and opinions in our modern world and social media. You can get the apps and look at the blogs and the websites and listen to podcasts and social media for whatever kind of slant or angle you're looking for. And you can find that out there. But I think sometimes the news is a little confusing, especially with information like this weekend when it first comes out. And my opinion on it would at best be some kind of speculation on the current situation. At worst, it'd be wrong. And so for me to give you wrong information contradicts anything that we should be doing as a Catholic organization, is sharing something that's not true.
Yeah.
And so we want to look at how we can learn about our faith, how we can grow in our faith, how we can inspire you in your faith, how I can be inspired in my faith, how we can share a little bit of the joy and the love that Christ has for us, and do it in a positive way, not dwell so much on the negative. There are plenty of people out there that are dwelling on the negative, but how we can be a light in the world, not to ignore the truth. We don't want to ignore these things when they come through, but to really take a look and say, like, what do we know about this now? Is there something that we would need to wait to get more information before we should actually be spreading this? Is there somebody that would be qualified that could give us a breakdown of this and give us actually productive, where do we go from here? What can we learn from this? What can we do with this information? Because if we just say, here's a bunch of bad news, let's ruin your day. How is that helpful?
Yeah. And ultimately, the thing is that no matter what is happening in the news, especially as it gets further and further removed from our actual communities and our actual families, no matter what is happening, like, we still have to live our lives as children of God. We still have to pursue holiness in our everyday concrete lives. We have to be moms and dads and brothers and sisters and children and parents, and we have to be neighbors to our neighbors and friends to our friends. And all of these things are our primary concern, no matter what is happening. It's not that none of those other things matter, and it's not that they don't have some effect on us, but ultimately what we have to worry about, most important when we wake up in the morning, is how am I going to be holy today? And so for you and I think on this show, what we're trying to do is make that daily holiness easier, to help you learn how to make that daily holiness happen, to start you off with a little bit of joy in the faith, with a little bit of maybe lessons to learn, to implement into your life, and ways that you can actually live as a child of God here in your family, in this area, wherever you're listening, in whatever your circumstances. And sometimes the news will have an effect on that. And sometimes it's just information that you're just going to have to wait and see what happens.
Right.
I mean, I love the news. I'm an avid news consumer in a lot of ways, but sometimes you just have to sit and say, well, that really stinks. And I wish that I knew what was happening. It's so confusing. I wish it wasn't happening at all, but it is. And you just have to say, okay, but today I have to be Andrea. And that means I have to be a mom and a wife and a neighbor and a friend and a worker and X, Y, and Z. And the news can't affect that.
Yeah. So if you have some topics that you'd like us to talk about, if you want something that you'd like to learn, and we'll find somebody that's an expert in the topic, let us know. If you think there's something that we're missing out on, let us know. You can email show@redeemerradio.com, but you can also find all kinds of different topics that we have talked, including serious topics, at kyleheimann.com. Just search for whatever you're looking for. Our thanks to Notre Dame Federal Credit Union for underwriting this show, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Until then, remember to leave room for the Holy Spirit.